Of the Mishnah Berurah yesterday. I was just trying to find exactly where we left off yesterday. We learned this first sif that you have to recite Kriya Shema with Kavana, Ema, Yira, Reses, and Zeya. I was just trying to find exactly where we left off yesterday. These are all terms that are used to describe an extra special focus on the words that I'm reciting. Okay? So, with that in mind, we learned Asher Anochi Mitzavecha Hayom Hainu Lomar B'chol Yom Yun Beinecha Kechadashim, that they should be new in your eyes as if they were just being given to you today. That's what the Shulchan Aruch writes. V'lo kemisha kavar shama oso harbe pa'amim she'enu chaviv etzlo. And the Shema, in other words, every day that you recite the Shema, you should have the attitude as if this is the first time you're saying it, the first time you're discovering these words. Yesterday, we went into the whole issue of the 245 words of Shema and versus the 248 limbs and how you get to that amount. So we're going to go on. Sif Dalid. Nohagin likros pasuk rishon b'kol ram kedei la'orer hakavana. The minhag is to recite the first pasuk in a loud voice to arouse kavana. And then we saw also Sif Hey, Nohagim litein yedeim al pneim b'kriyas pasuk rishon kedei shelo yistakel b'davar acher shemono milachavein. The minhag is to put your right hand on your face when you recite Kriya Shema, so that you won't be able to look at anything else that would prevent you from having kavana.
Is that if you're right-handed, or what if you're left-handed?
Yeah, someone asked that yesterday. We said, yeah, it's whatever your right hand is. If you're a lefty, so your left hand is your right hand. Okay, Sif Vav. Tzarech laharich b'ches shel echad. So we saw yesterday, we started doing this yesterday. You have to elongate the ches of echad. And we had seen yesterday that the letter ches represents the vertical connection, the seven heavens and the earth, so that you can coronate God in heaven and earth. And we also saw that the letter ches itself, as it's written in the Sefer Torah, has a caret, C-A-R-E-T, like a sort of that connects the two legs of the ches. So it's pointing up to heaven. And then you should elongate the dalet even longer. Which is 1/3 ches and 2/3 dalet. And it's that God is the master of the horizontal spreading out of the four corners of the earth. V'lo yarich yoser mikashir zeh, that you shouldn't make it longer than that. V'yesh nohagim lahatos harosh gefi hamachshava ma'ilomata uladalad ruchos. Some people, this is where we left off yesterday. Some people have a minhag to incline the head based on what you're thinking. You go up, you go down, you go into all other directions, right? And Ron had said that he does this. So the only thing you have to be careful about in this respect, as the Mishnah Berurah says, Afal gav de amrinan hakorei shema lo yikrotz be'inav. He says, even though we learn that when you're reciting Kriya Shema, you're not supposed to be making any facial gestures, because that in itself shows that you're distracted from the words. He says, "Dahasam hakritza v'haramiza l'tzarch davar acher mavatlin hakavana." He says, making facial gestures to, let's say, a friend, or snapping your fingers or whatever. He says that nullifies the kavana. Aval hacha haramiza hi l'tzarch hakavana. But here, the facial movements, the head motions, are to help you get into the words. V'hataya tzricha lios mizrach tzafon ma'irav darom v'lo yata harosh mizrach ma'irav tzafon darom. He says, yet when you incline your head and you move your head around, you have to make sure you go first east then north, then west, then south, and don't let your head go first east, west, north, and south. Why? Because that looks like you're making a shesi va'erev. Anyone know what the term shesi va'erev means? It's a woof in the warp. But shesi va'erev means whoop and wharf. But it means something specific when we're talking about motions like that. Shesi va'erev is a euphemism for the crucifix.
Oh, I was thinking they cross themselves.
Yeah, that's right. So you're not supposed to move. Let's see, how would you do it? That would be a crucifix. So what you got to do is,
Gosh, that would impact my kavana alone, just
right.
trying to.
Yeah. So anyway,
They do some with their hand motion too, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, with their hands too.
they do, but he's saying even with your head, you shouldn't try to imitate the way that the Christians do it.
So that room reference is to not mention it specifically, but.
Yeah.
Reference.
Bottom line is, well, it's a crisscross. That's really what it's all this.
So we don't want to say that.
Yeah. So anyway, bottom line is that some people do it. I don't do it at all, just because it's too much for me to think about while I'm just trying to get the words out correctly within the meaning of the words.
Same direction we do the nanuim for the.
I think so. Yeah. I think that'll work. Yeah. East is forward. North is to your right. Is north to your right? No, north is to your left. Yeah. Right. So it's for east is this way because you're facing the Aron.
Yeah.
And then south would be to your right.
Right.
And then west would be behind you and your left would be north. Okay. So maybe it's not exactly the same. I don't know. I know. Okay. Yad Kish Bedalis. So the Shulchan Aruch gives us a few other sort of things that you should be careful about. Specifically trying to make sure that you say it correctly. Yad Gish Bedalis, make you emphasize the letter Dalid of the Echad, Shelo Tehe Karesh, so that it's not read as Resh. It is a hard letter to stretch out. Some linguists suggest that the stretching out of the Dalid was much easier when we pronounced the Dalid like the Teimanim, because they pronounce it like a hard TH. Echad. Yeah, it's hard to say echad. And what you also have to be careful is you don't say echad. Yeah, because that's a different word. Echad. It doesn't mean anything, but it's not the right word. Okay. Now, lo yachtov b'ches v'lo yarich ba'alef. You should not grab the ches, meaning make sure that it's not said too quickly. So like echad, right? V'lo yarich ba'alef. Don't elongate the aleph, because now what's the reason? Because if you say the aleph too long, it'll sound like it's a separate word. Echad. You shouldn't do either. Okay. Asr lomar shema beis pa'amim, bein shekofel hatevo shomer shema shema, bein shekofel hapasuk rishon. You can't say shema twice. Remember, we saw this in the Yerushalmi also. We talked about this in the commentary, that if you didn't have kavana, you have to go back and say it, but you have to say it quietly, because if you say it 2 times out loud, whether you say each word twice or whether you say the whole pasuk twice, Mishum, says the Mishnah Berurah, Denira Kilu Mekabel Lav Shtei Rishuyos Chas v'Shalom. It could be a sign that you're a dualist and you have 2 deities. Vimlo Kivein Meikari Yachzor v'Yikra Balachash. And therefore, if you didn't have kavana the first time and you know that you weren't Yotze, read it silently the second time. Vimleka Shomin Afilu B'Kol Ramater. If, however, there's no one around, then you could say it the second time out loud. But if you had proper kavana the first time, then even saying it quietly the second time is going to be usur. And this is where people with OCD are in a lot of trouble. Yeah, and I mean this quite seriously because I've seen people who have problems with obsessive behavior, and they're very well intentioned, and they I actually went over to a young rabbi once, and I said, what you're doing is not permitted according to the Shulchan Aruch, because he kept saying Shema, 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 Yisra, Yisra, El, right? He was really focused, really like he wanted to make sure he got it right. And I said, that's not right. Anyway, okay.
I mean, but there's nothing wrong with saying it as we do multiple times in the day. It's just in close succession. We say the Shema in the beginning of opening, and then we say it.
Oh yeah. No, that's
when it's in
that's
succession.
what it's in close succession. Yeah. Okay. And the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Samach Aleph goes through a number of different points of language that you have to be careful about, but we're not going to go through the rest of it right now. Maybe we'll get to it a little bit later. That's really what I wanted us to see for today. And now we're ready to continue in the Gemara. Okay? So we can put on the lights again, if it's okay with you. And let's go continue our studies. Wow. Yeah, thank you.
They were going. That wakes you up.
Yeah,
It's been so dark all morning this morning.
yeah. Okay, so we're on Yud Tes Amud Aleph, and now that we've spoken about the certain areas of being careful and having proper kavana, now we're also going to talk about another halacha that you have to be careful about in Kriya Shema, which is not having a hefsek, not interrupting your Shema. So the Rebbe Muna Omar Mishum Rebbe Yuda, it's right at it's the second line of the Gemara. Rebbe Muna or Rebbe Mani said in the name of Rebbe Yehuda, who says in the name of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, Im hifsak ba kedei likros is kula, lo yatsa yidei chovasa. If you have a pause and you interrupt your Shema, and in the middle, and you have a pause that is so long that during that pause you could have said the entire Kriya Shema, then you haven't fulfilled your obligation. And this is, as we'll see in the Mishnah Berurah later on, if you like in footnote 6, it says, Din zehu beini mira hefsek be'emtza haperek o bein hapsukim. This is true regardless of whether you are in the middle of a paragraph or you're in between paragraphs of Shema. Ve'ein hevda le'inyan zeh beinim hifsek b'shesika o b'dibur. And there's no difference whether the pause or the interruption is with speech or it's just with silence. Ele imkein sach b'mezid. He says, unless you speak deliberately in between the paragraphs of Shema or in the middle of the paragraph. Sha'az yesh omrim shafilu hifsik b'sicha mu'etes chazul rosh. There are opinions that say that if you deliberately or flagrantly speak during the Shema, you have to go back to the beginning. Even if you didn't wait the amount of time that it takes to say the whole thing. And we're going to look this up in the halacha once we finish this discussion. Now, Rebbe Yirmiyah b'Shem Rav, halacha keRebbe Muna, Sh'amar mishum Rebbe Yehuda, Sh'amar mishum Rebbe Yossi Haglili. He says that's how we paskin. We're going to see later on another opinion on this. There is going to be an opinion that says that you're still Yotzei even if you paused. Now, Rabbi Yochanan b'Shem Rabbi Shimon ben Yehozadak, af behalel uvikriyas hamagila came. This halacha is also true as far as interrupting or pausing in the middle of your recital, if you do this for Hallel and for the reading of the Megillah Esther. In both of those cases as well, that you also, if you have an interruption, you're not going to be Yotzei. Now the question is, Abba bar Rav Huna v'Rav Chisda habu Yasvin, Amrin af b'tikiyos kain. So they were sitting, and their initial reaction was to extrapolate from there that if a person is in the middle of listening to Tekiah Shofar and he interrupts, then the same halacha would apply. That the shofar blasts, if you're in the middle of a whole series of shofar blasts, a guy does a Tekiah and then pauses for a while and then does the Shvarim, that you're not going to be Yotzei. However, Salkon leves Rav, v'shamun Rav Huna b'shem Rav, afilu shema'an ad tesha sha'os yatza. However, when they came to the house of Rav, they came to the base medrash, they heard Rav Huna say in the name of Rav that no, when it comes to Tekiah Shofar, then even if you hear it over the course of several hours, over the course of the day, like in other words, let's say you're supposed to hear 9 blasts, and you hear 1 blast per hour, then you're still going to be Yotzei Tekiah Shofar. Now, he says, the question is why? The Gemara never really explains what the difference between Tekiah Shofar is and the recital of Shema and the recital of Hallel and the recital of the Megillah. The footnote doesn't even give us a reason, but it would seem to me, from a conceptual point of view, that when you're trying to process information, you have to concatenate that information one word to the next in order for that data to make any sense. But when you're thinking about a sound, the sound of a tekiah, the sound of a shavarim, don't necessarily have to be concatenated in order for them to have an effect and to make an impact. And so that seems to me the reason as to why, the ahavta, the ideas have to be connected in order for them to be cogent. But sounds, which is a much more basic concept that doesn't require you to process complex ideas, that can be separated out. Amar Rebbe Zeira, Ad Da'ana Taman, when I was still in Bavel, because Rebbe Zeira made Aliyah at some point in his life, Tzrichas Li, I had a question about this whole issue, about interrupting during Tekiah Shofar. The Chatzalakis Lahacha, but when I made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, Shemois Rabbi Yasa b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, Afilu Shema'an Kol Hayom Yatza. I heard Rabbi Yasa say in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that if you heard those shofar blasts, the requisite number of shofar blasts over the course of the whole day, you're Yotzei. As a matter of course, we have a requirement nowadays for 30 blasts, but the original was really to only have 9 blasts. How 9 became 30 is a discussion for when we study Maseches Rosh Hashanah. Okay.
But you're breaking up a line?
Even if you're breaking up a line.
Brackets on either side.
Yeah, so you're right. Really, Tekiah is supposed to bound the Shvarim on both sides. So, but apparently, as long as you've heard them,
What if they're out of sequence?
yeah. Let me just see what the footnote says. All right, it could be that each line has to be Tekiah, Shvarim, Tekiah, Tekiah, Trua, Tekiah. It's unclear from the Gemara whether you're interrupting one line or you're interrupting between the lines. Okay. So, and then Rebbe Zeira adds, V'hu shema'an al haseder, that you have to hear them in the proper sequence, which means you have to hear first the Tekiah, and then afterwards a Trua, and then afterwards a Tekiah. but if you didn't hear them in sequential order, you're not Yotze. It seems from the language of the Gemara that even if you interrupt a line, you're still Yotze. And the reason is because the original amount was 9 blasts. Tekiah, Shvarim, Tekiah, 3 times. Okay, that's 9. 3 times 3 is 9. And it says if you heard 9 over 9 hours, you're Yotze, which means you heard Tekiah hour 1, Shvarim hour 2, Tekiah hour 3. So it seems even if you interrupt the line, I guess as long as maybe you're not listening to other sounds in the interim, there aren't other shofar blasts in the interim. That's why you have to, it has to be heard in sequential order. Now, the Gemara continues this discussion of Tekiah shofar, and it says, Rabbi Yossi Bo'eh, he says, Rabbi Yossi asks the following question. There's a bit of a discrepancy in the girsa, whether the word Bo'eh means asking a question, which is what it usually means, or whether he's making a statement, but let's learn it as he's asking a question. Havazet tzarech peshuta harishona, v'zet tzarech peshuta hachrona, tekiah achas motzia yidei shtehen. It would seem to me that 2 people can listen to one sound of a tekiah, and for one person it could be the end of a line, meaning the end of a sequence, and for the other person it could be the beginning of a sequence, because each one of them may be listening to a different set of shofar blasts. But that's okay. As long as we both hear a tekiah, I could use it for the completion of my sequence, and you can use it for the beginning of your sequence. That's what Rabbi Yossi is suggesting. And Rabbi Abin Bar Chia Boy, and then so he's asking it as a question, and if you learn that it's a question, it's an unanswered question. And similarly, we're going to have another question that's raised about this concept, which is if Kriya Shema ubirchoseha, or is it he velo birchoseha, or is it birchoseha velo he? So what if I pause in the middle of Shema, and I pause long enough to be able to say the 3 paragraphs of Shema? Is that considered to be a hefsek, and therefore I'm not Yotze? Or is it that I have to have a pause that is so long that I could say all the blessings of the Shema and the Shema before and after, and that would be considered a hefsek? Or is it just the Shema without its brachos? Or is it just the amount of time to say the brachos without saying the Shema itself? That also is, like he says in the footnote, he says, Imanu omrim shahabrachos nechshavos bifnei atzman. If we say that the brachos of Kriya Shema are separate from the Shema itself, im hifsik beparshios Shema yashir kedei likros es aparshios, im hifsik bebrachos yashir kedei lomer es abrachos. What the Gemara is asking is like this. It seems like you're saying that if I pause at any point during this portion of davening called the blessings of the Shema, then I haven't been Yotze and I have to go back and read the whole thing again. So what if I pause in the middle of Yotzer HaMa'oros? I said Yotzer HaMa'oros, and I'm about to start Ahavar Haba, and I pause. So there too, I'd have to go back to the beginning if I had a significant pause. And is it the amount of, how long is the pause? The amount of time that it takes to say the entire thing from Baruch Hu to Ga'al Yisrael, or for just the blessings of the Shema, or just the Shema itself. So that's something that is not resolved. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, hey, there are a lot of times when I'm sitting after I've said Hashem Elokechem Emes, and I'm sitting waiting for that blasted rabbi who's
Making everybody slow down.
just taking his jolly old time and doesn't have a care in the world, and just is prolonging my agony, and
Not true, Rabbi, not true.
so is sometimes for some people it could be Kedei Likros Kula. that pause could be as long as the time that it takes to recite the entire Shema. But as we'll see when we learn the poskim, as long as you're still focused on your davening, then that pause is not a problem. And we'll see that when we look at the poskim.
And I guess the
Okay.
length of time it takes to say the entire Shema differs depending on the person.
Depends on the person. So that's another thing that we're going to see in just a moment. The next point that the Gemara makes is Hifsik, let's say, like the commentary says, Kedei Shir Shlish Min HaKriya. Let's say my pause was only to finish a third of the Shema. Im Hifsik be'emsa HaKriya lemeshech zman sheyish bo likros shlish mikriya Shema ulachar miken himshech b'kriyasa v'chazer v'hifsik shlisha. And then I can commence my recital, like I paused between the first paragraph of Shema and the second paragraph of Shema, the amount of time that it takes the first paragraph of Shema. And then when I finished the second paragraph of Shema, I paused again, the amount of time that it takes to say the second paragraph of Shema. What will be the halacha? Can the pauses conjoin with each other to make up a longer pause? Or each one of them is considered to be a separate pause, and as long as you didn't pause at one long stretch, the amount of time that it takes to say the whole Shema, you're still okay. That question is also, it remains unanswered.
Rabbi, does it also depend on what the reason is for the pause? Meaning, if you're
Yes,
pausing,
that's something that we're going to look at when we look at the halacha. We'll wait until tomorrow to open the Shulchan Aruch and look at the halacha, but we're still going to continue going on. Another question that the Gemara asks, Bikore Misha'arin, he says, this is Paul's question. Whose length of Kriya Shema is the benchmark? When we said you have to pause for the amount of time that it takes to recite Kriya Shema, whose recital are we discussing? Is it your recital, or is it the Shliach Tzibor's recital? Is the average length? Is it B'korei Misharin or B'chol Adam Misharin? He says, like the average person.
Yeah.
So which one do we use?
You missed one.
What?
We go today, we go by the Rav in the shul.
No, but the length.
But that
the length of
doesn't,
the pause.
in other words, the question is, assuming that a pause creates a problem, how long does that pause have to be to create a problem? Is it the amount of time that it takes Ron Becker to recite the Shema? Or is the time that it takes for an average person to recite the Shema? To necessitate, you're going back and start all over again. So Amar Rebbe Matanya, this one has an answer. Rebbe Matanya says it makes sense to say Bakore, that you use the individuals as his criterion. And as we'll see, this too is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch. And we'll study Siman Samech Hey, and we're going to get into this discussion. Now,
I guess that would be more stringent then, because if that person is going.
is
to
really
the
Speedy Gonzalez, yeah.
And that's
when he-
why he has to wait, but he only has the time that he sped through it.
Right. So we'll see if indeed every time you pause, even when you're fully aware of what's going on, then it's going to be a problem. I would agree. Then that would create a problem for people who recite the Shema in 30 seconds and they're waiting 2 minutes for the rabbi to finish his Shema. By the way, I challenge you, I saw this once on a video. How many seconds longer is my Shema than your Shema?
How long does it seem, or how long is it?
Yeah, that's exactly the point. It may seem longer, but it's not that much longer. If you calculate it in seconds, you'll discover that it's probably not more than about a minute.
Right.
And therefore, you could use that minute much more productively by slowing down your Shema
I think that's.
and being more meticulous in saying every word. So that's what I would
Depending
recommend
on
that you
Who's
think
present, I do
about.
change the speed of my Shema, knowing that it's gonna take longer so I can take more time.
Right. Okay, we will continue this discussion in Mirz Hashem tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody.